Hi, everybody. This is lesson 15, April 2nd. I found a outdoor club shirt you haven't seen before, so something new for today. Something fresh for spring, which is what we need. I was fortunate enough to get outside yesterday and find a lonely, open field to fly my radio control airplanes, which is one of my many hobbies, and something which can easily be done alone and something which brings me much joy doing. This is a picture of some of my radio control airplanes, including a lot of World War II planes and then even a World War I plane. That's actually still hanging in my classroom. Not sure when I'll see that again. Okay, I promised that we would get back to history today, and we will. I've decided that rather than follow traditional timelines of history, like I more or less had been doing, I'm going to jump around to stories that I feel I can better relate to our story, which is being written today and every day lately. You know, until VA Day. First, I want to express some concern about what I'm seeing as a disturbing trend lately. I posted something about this yesterday, and I got a number of comments in agreement and examples. There's something going on with our most vulnerable population, the elderly. Some of them are not getting it, or they simply don't care. Unfortunately, I think it's the latter, which makes it even worse because of the potential consequences of their actions. I won't get into the countless examples, but many elderly seem to have complete disregard for their safety. It's interesting, a few weeks ago we were furious with the college kids on spring break partying in Florida, and it turns out that their grandparents might not be much better. And these people are the most vulnerable of all and most likely to need advanced life support, which may not be available when they need it if they fall ill. And they may also endanger those they love. My own father's a big violator. He's got posted on the wall in the kitchen of his home, "The only thing to fear is fear itself," FDR's famous quote from the Great Depression. Unfortunately, today, that's not quite true. There is indeed an invisible and deadly enemy out there. And while fear may not necessarily be appropriate, respect surely is. We must understand this enemy. To defeat it means to avoid it. Simply by surviving, we have won. All we can do is try to educate our elders, as I'm trying to educate the young and everyone else. Okay, I'm done with that rant. I apologize to the children for even having to bring it up. Many people, myself included, have been comparing this struggle that we're going through today, COVID-19, to World War II. It's the only thing in recent history which possibly can compare. An interesting thought occurred to me as I typed these words. Now, please, let me say I don't want this to be misunderstood. I was a full-time paramedic on 9/11. I have a poster of it in my classroom. I'd bet that while I discuss it on every anniversary date, I do so more graphically than any teacher I know. I want to make darn sure that my students understand it. Now, that being said, this situation today far exceeds 9/11 in its enormity in every way. For the last 19 years, our collective memories have been time-stamped by 9/11. Forevermore, they will now be time-stamped by this. As I said, I'm going to spin the wheel. Not spin the bottle, spin the wheel. on the timeline of history until it stops on the spring and summer of 1940. We will begin anew from that point. Today's history lesson will be about one of the darkest moments of the 20th century, followed by one of the greatest miracles of the 20th century, all in a very short period of time, a matter of days and weeks. Today, we will learn about Dunkirk, and it is also my movie recommendation. Now, if you watch the movie, it's not like 1917, another great movie, which is just continuous. Dunkirk is shot in 3 different parts, overlapping each other, and it's a little bit hard to follow. You got to really kind of pay attention. I didn't fully get it till I saw it the second time, but it is a great movie. And it's actually shot at Dunkirk, first time that's ever been done. Dunkirk could be called both a battle and a miracle. Certainly, it was both. At the start of World War II, in less than 6 months, the Nazi war machine had crushed Poland, Finland, Norway, Holland, and Belgium. The world had never seen anything like it. And no one seemed to be able to stop this evil force that was swallowing up millions of people. The Germans had learned a valuable lesson in World War I in the trenches. Trench warfare doesn't work. All it does is get men killed and gains nothing. So with the use of modern technology of the time, they invented a new and devastating method of war, similar to what we used during the invasion of Iraq. It is called lightning war, or Blitzkrieg in German. As opposed to trench warfare, these armies move very rapidly, often covering many miles a day. This lightning war, or Blitzkrieg, was spearheaded by German armor, specifically tanks, which the Germans called panzers. Now, another one of my many hobbies is model building. It goes back to my youth, and sometimes I still do it today. This I built a couple years ago in my spare time. This is a German Panzer Mark IV, which was their #1 main tank. Not the Tiger everybody knows, but this is the one they produced in the most numbers. And imagine hundreds of these coming at you. Well, that's what the world faced. The tanks would race ahead in large formations, smashing into enemy defenses. No army in history had yet faced a large-scale, rapid tank assault before Poland in 1939. Hundreds of these panzers race across the countryside, dozens of miles a day, smashing everything in their way, close enough to support one another. But panzers were only one half of the Blitzkrieg equation. The other half was provided by the German Air Force, which they called the Luftwaffe. Mostly bombers, and specifically a type of dive bomber known as the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, which could hit specific targets rather accurately. The Stuka also made a chilling scream when it dove to drop its bomb. This is a really old Stuka model my son made probably 20 years ago. But this was the German bomber. It had a 2-man crew and it dropped one single 500-pound bomb. There's actually an actual Stuka hanging in the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. If you ever get a chance, go see it. The Germans did this on purpose, that screaming noise, to terrify their enemies. If the panzers hit a strong defensive point, they would call in Stukas to come blow it up. They were able to do this because radio had advanced to the point where planes and tanks could actually talk to each other. There are countless videos, and it became a very effective and very deadly system. And there are countless videos on YouTube which show footage of Blitzkrieg if you're interested, hours and hours of it. Country after country was being conquered in just a matter of days or weeks by this Nazi war machine and its Blitzkrieg, and France was about to get its turn. Now, a little background here. On September 3rd, just days after Germany invaded Poland, England and France declared war on Germany also, as they had pledged to do. Hitler gambled that they would not, but he was wrong. He usually was. Now the same sides as in World War I were at war again, just 21 years after the end of that war. History does what? Bueller? As it did in World War I, England moved the vast majority of its army across the English Channel to France to meet the Germans, leaving very few troops back home in Britain. Together, the armies of Britain and France combined to create an equal force to the Germans, at least on paper. Historians have argued that Germany may have been defeated at this point quickly by an invasion of this large Allied army. We will never know. They chose to dig in and wait for a German attack instead, and that opportunity was lost to history. That German attack would not come for some months while they conquered all the other countries I mentioned before. Meanwhile, the Allied army did nothing but wait, and that time period has come to be called the Phony War. On May 10th, 1940, it was phony no more. Germany invaded France using blitzkrieg. The French had a system of forts, all supporting each other in a line several hundred miles long and built after World War I to prevent another German invasion. It was called the Maginot Line. They put all their faith in this, and the Germans simply raced around it through Belgium. Now, the Germans actually had several thousand less tanks than the Allies, who spread their own tanks out widely in defensive positions. This proved to be a big failure. The Germans had several thousand more aircraft than the Allies, and the two armies were roughly equal in men at about 3 million each. Now the German army would face their first really tough opponent who matched them on equal terms. No army yet had that opportunity. None of it mattered. The results were the same. France would surrender to Germany on June 25th in just 6 weeks. And Hitler would dance in the streets of Paris. By comparison, in all 4 years of World War I, Germany never got any closer than 75 miles to Paris. Shortly before the surrender, though, a miracle would happen, one which would change the course of history. As the French and British armies were smashed to pieces by blitzkrieg, they continued to fall back and fall apart. A catastrophe of historic proportions was taking place and threatening to get much worse. Sound familiar? Just turn on today's news. Back then, nearly the entire British army was trapped in France. If it was destroyed, England would be forced to surrender. And Adolf Hitler wins World War II in less than 1 year. No one can imagine what the world would be like, nor do we wish to. Although I have seen one episode of The Man in the High Castle, a series about America losing World War II, not my cup of tea. I prefer green tea with lemon. Thank you very much. In fact, I'll have some. That's my cup of tea. So here's the crisis upon which world history depends: the survival of the British Army, which somehow has to get home to England across the English Channel without being completely destroyed first. As the British soldiers retreat before the German onslaught, the panzers race around them and reach the English Channel, cutting them off in a pocket with their backs to the sea. The entire British Army, and with them the only hope to carry on this horrible struggle another day, are now surrounded in this small pocket on the Belgian coast at a town called Dunkirk. 47 miles of ocean water called the English Channel separate them from the safety of home. The Allied army is in complete disarray. Men and equipment are scattered all along the beach. Many have no weapons. There's dead and wounded. German airplanes now almost completely rule the skies over France and Dunkirk as the airfields have been captured. They're bombing and strafing the beaches. The Royal Air Force, that's the British Royal Air Force as it was called, now had to provide long-distance support from airfields in England in a hopeless attempt to protect their army, which was trapped on the beach. Hitler is just one move away from checkmate, from defeating both France and Britain in just a few months. Unimaginable. Without question, it was one of the darkest moments in human history. It all seemed lost. FDR back in America worried about our British cousins as well. If England were to fall, the Nazi Empire would have an entire ocean protecting it instead of just the English Channel. They could then focus all their military might against Russia and under those circumstances undoubtedly crush it as well. Truly, a miracle would be needed to save the British Army and therefore the world. Hitler was about to give them one. He was about to commit one of his many colossal blunders which would eventually cost Germany the war. He stopped the tanks before they overran the beaches, which they could have easily done. The crews and their machines were worn out after months of heavy fighting going back to the invasion of Poland in September. They needed a break, and they got one. So the tanks halted outside Dunkirk as the French formed a last defensive perimeter around Dunkirk. This was also because the chief of Hitler's Air Force, a man named Hermann Goering, who flew in combat in World War I with the famous Red Baron, he convinced Hitler that his Air Force alone could destroy the British, trapped on the beach. They had proved invincible so far. Now it's obvious I can't finish this story without going on at least another 10 minutes, so with that I'll say, to be continued tomorrow. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay home, Dad.